we are up to our fourth section, which is Understanding Asylum. Excuse me. And we have Miss Cathy Presnell from Tennessee. She is our 2016 Tennessee Teacher of the Year, so let's go ahead and give her a big round of applause.
Good afternoon. It is important for us to understand asylum, what it is and what it does, so we can understand the experiences of our students who navigate this complex process and then take action, because we are teachers and these are our students and this is what teachers do. Asylum is a protection granted to foreign nationals already in the U.S. or at the border who meet our international law definition of a refugee. And a refugee, according to law, refers to a person who is located outside of the United States and has demonstrated that they have been persecuted, that they have a well-founded fear of persecution for one of 5 reasons, and this is important to remember: race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion in their country of origin. So in essence, refugees who flee to another country in which they seek safe haven are referred to as asylum seekers. And an asylee, a person granted asylum, is protected from being returned to his or her home country. One key point to note: a person applying for asylum is required to prove that he or she has a credible fear of persecution in their country of nationality that is well-founded on one of those 5 reasons. However, if a person is granted asylum, they are legally allowed to stay in the United States without fear of deportation. They may work, travel abroad, apply for asylum for their families, and after 1 year, they become eligible for a green card. Refugees and asylum seekers were first formally recognized by the international community at the 1951 UN Convention. As we heard earlier this morning, in the wake of World War II and the atrocities of the Holocaust, 145 nations came together at this convention to define refugees and establish standards for the treatment of people seeking protection in foreign countries. The 1967 UN Protocol broadened these protections, and in 1980, Congress incorporated those standards and definitions into U.S. law, enshrining the right to apply for asylum in United States law. So, as a signatory to the 1967 Protocol and through U.S. immigration law, we have legal obligations to provide protection to those who qualify as refugees. Like credible fear, this too is key. Refugees who enter our country have a legal right to apply for asylum. Now, how do you apply? So there are 2 clear paths. One is affirmative asylum and the other one is defensive asylum. It's the one we're going to focus on today. Those who enter the U.S. without inspection generally must apply for asylum through the defensive asylum process, and it's the one we're going to focus on. With defensive asylum, a person has requested asylum as a form of relief or defense against forcible removement from the United States before an immigration judge. And we're going to describe this process today through the story of Natalie and her daughter Julia. Natalie and Julia have been victims of gang violence in Guatemala. As a single mother, Natalie runs a fruit stand in her local market, and gangs threatened to murder her daughter if she didn't pay a bribe equivalent to several months of profits. For years, she has been repeatedly raped by different men in her town, and she worries that her 13-year-old daughter faces a similar fate. Natalie and Julia make the long trek to the United States, arrive at an entry point, and ask for asylum. However, I want you to know, even if they cross the border between entry points under both U.S. and international law, border officials must allow people who say they are afraid to return home to submit their claims in the asylum process. First, Natalie and Julia are taken to a processing center for inadmissibles, where they're held in temporary cells. They're interviewed, and officers are required to ask if they are afraid of going home. Natalie describes her fears, and officers notify ICE officers who look for detention bed space to house Natalie and Julia. This can take several days. Once they are placed in detention, Natalie and Julia are both interviewed by officers who are specially trained in evaluating asylum cases under the law. The interview by phone takes about 2 hours and is confusing because they don't understand English well. The asylum officers are looking for whether their stories are consistent, detailed, plausible based on country conditions, and they run security checks in a variety of government databases. Natalie and Julia are lucky here. In some cases, just starting this process takes 5 to 8 weeks. Now, this is one place where credible fear comes in. Even with the legitimate threat against Julia back home, Natalie might not win asylum if she can't prove it's because of race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. And in fact, many people from Central America fleeing gang violence have trouble proving that their fear is based on one of these 5 reasons. Luckily, Natalie's fear is deemed credible at this point, and she receives a notice to appear, a document that gives her a scheduled date for immigration court. She and Julia remain in the detention center throughout the next 24 months of their process. At the first hearing, she receives an asylum application, which must be completed and submitted within 1 year, and a list of free and low-cost attorneys. Natalie can't afford an attorney, and the pro bono attorneys are all book solid, so she will have to represent herself, which dramatically lessens the likelihood that she will be successful. Several hearings later, Natalie turns in her application. Waiting for hearings can take months or years. The immigration court has a backlog nationwide of close to 700,000 cases. And in fiscal year 2016, immigration courts received more than 63,700 defensive asylum cases, a 221% increase from 2012. When she does get this hearing, the judge schedules a private hearing, and Natalie presents the evidence to defend her story. At or after this, the judge makes a decision. And in our case, Natalie is not granted asylum. This isn't surprising. Nationally, only about 31% of defensive cases that were decided were given asylum in 2016. All told, the process took more than 24 months. They spent the entire time waiting in a detention facility that was run by a private prison company. They were interviewed and screened by multiple federal agencies. They navigated confusing explanations in a language they didn't know very well, and they faced traumatic repercussions from their journey to the U.S. and their time in detention, including clinical depression and frequent infections. In the end, Natalie and Julia were denied asylum because they could not prove that their threats at home were based on one of the 5 predetermined reasons. Others may be denied asylum simply because they did not know about the 1-year deadline, or were not able to submit their application within 1 year because of systemic backlogs of cases. Natalie can appeal the case, but with scant resources and a lack of legal know-how, she just doesn't have the option. Natalie and Julia are one story among thousands. The number of refugees around the world has grown dramatically. In 2012, there were 9.9 million. In 2017, there were 19.6 million refugees worldwide. In fiscal year 2018, 159,000 immigrants in the United States filed for asylum, a 274% increase since 2008. And in late 2018, 5,000 people were waiting to begin the process, and U.S. officers were only granting 40 to 100 cases per day. In March 2018, there were more than 318,000 affirmative asylum applications pending. On average, they had been pending for 718 days and remained unresolved. Asylum seekers were waiting more than 1,000 days on average for that outcome, and these prolonged backlogs can cause separation of families and leave family members abroad in dangerous situations. In fiscal year 2016, only 20,455 individuals were granted asylum. And what's closest to our hearts as teachers, in 2017, children worldwide under the age of 18 represented just over half, or 52% of the entire refugee population. We are teachers, and these are our students, and it is our responsibility to take action. Thank you.